Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to my Facebook Live session for Thursday, the 25th of June, which is looking like a momentous day. As I promised, I'm going to give you an update about what the week's events have meant for driving lessons, give you an overview of what needs to be done to keep everybody safe when driving lessons start in terms of COVID precautions. And then finally, just to show you a video about spotting signs that hopefully you'll find useful. So first of all, and this is literally off the presses. I've sat down here about 5 minutes ago, just ready to do this. I've seen an email confirming what we all heard today. So just to very quickly recap how we got to today. On Tuesday, I think it was, Boris made his announcement about pubs, etc., which obviously was the big thing that everybody's been waiting for. So from the 4th of July, pubs and hospitality, restaurants, cinemas, etc., are going to be allowed to open. But at that point, it really still wasn't clear as to whether driving lessons would be allowed to go ahead. They're still stopping things like nail bars and gyms being open, and bearing in mind the sort of training environment that we have as driving instructors. There was a lot of doubt about whether we were going to be included in that 4th of July, and some people were feeling it would be, but most felt we wouldn't, and certainly at that point the DVSA advice continued to remain that we shouldn't teach other than key workers. However, as of today, well, in fact, as of lunchtime today, Jacob Rees-Mogg stood up in the House and said that from the 4th of July, driving lessons would be able to resume, and the DVSA would be sending out an announcement to driving instructors later today. And as I said, as of a few minutes ago, I've actually seen that. So let's have a quick look through what we've been told. As I say, this is hot off the press. So the DVSA have basically confirmed that driving lessons, theory tests and driving tests will restart in England. So what I'm talking about is for England only. If you live in Scotland or Wales and you're watching this, then I'm sorry, it won't apply to you. But from 4th of July, they do restart. They're doing a bit of a phased approach. Now, from a point of view of driving lessons, they are allowing us to start, so we will be able to start teaching learners, both those who have tests booked and those who are at an earlier stage. They don't have to be key workers anymore. We will obviously be expected to take precautions to keep everybody safe, and that's going to be the second part of the session this evening that I'll go through. So when will lessons and tests restart? So driving lessons, as I said, and theory tests from Saturday the 4th of July. And then driving tests generally from Wednesday the 22nd of July. Okay. Now, what that will mean is that anybody who has a driving test booked before then, and I know that all of my existing pupils who had tests booked, they're all before the July the 22nd. They are all going to go on hold. Most of you will probably already have had that information to tell you that the lessons are on hold. But if you haven't, then it will be coming soon. Keep an eye out. Check your junk mail and your spam folders, because often they'll end up in there, and people think they haven't seen them. Equally, keep checking, because you will also receive an invite to tell you that you're being allowed to rebook. So motorcycles and mopeds, lorries, buses, coaches, cars and trailers, specialist vehicles and ADIs, these are all categories that the DVSA are also interested in, but for the most part, for the people that will be listening to me tonight, that's not really what you're here to find out about. So as I said, they're hoping to get the countries moving again. I'm just going to swap over to an email that I had that has some other information in it that actually goes into a bit more than that press release just there, and the key bits are here. So same again, driving tests, theory tests restarting. 6th of July, they're going to expand the critical worker driving tests to more applicants, so more key workers will be able to get tests. New candidates will not yet be able to book their driving tests until all the tests reserved for critical workers have been carried out, and everybody who has had a driving test put on hold, so those are you that I've just referred to, they've had the opportunity to choose a new time and date. Once all of that is done, then you'll be able to start booking new driving tests. But be prepared for quite a long waiting list. It's inevitable after everything that's happened that driving tests are going to take a long time to come through. You're going to be talking months towards the back end of the year, I imagine, potentially. A lot's also going to depend on how examiners get back to work as well. So, as I said, keep an eye out on your inbox if you're one of those people that's affected. So, as I say, that is the main update for this week, and obviously it's a good update. Your driving instructor will likely be making plans to decide when they're going to start to work. I've been doing that and contacting my pupils and starting to sort my diary out. On a personal level, I'm going to try to structure my diary so that I'm doing longer lessons and potentially less frequently. That's, again, I'm going to come on to the safety aspects in a second, but again, to try and keep everybody as safe as possible by reducing the number of interactions that I'm having on a daily basis with pupils, etc. So that's the update. That's what we've all been waiting for, and as I say, we'll start seeing the ball rolling in the next week or so, I'm sure. As ever, if anybody has any questions whilst I'm going on, please just type them in the comment box and I'll answer them. But otherwise, I'm going to move on to the presentation, which talks about how to control COVID in a driving lesson environment. So let's start the slideshow. Hang on a minute. Okay, that's on the wrong screen. Okay, what we'll do is just hold on a second. Okay, we'll just run it from here. Okay then, so in order to control COVID, basically each driving instructor should be performing a risk assessment. And that will allow them to work out what risks they face in giving lessons. Now we know what a lot of them are, but we're going to talk about how those should be assessed. So there are 7 tasks for safety to keep ourselves safe, you, the customers, and both our families, and also the examiners. So we have 7 areas. The first area we need to consider is high-risk groups. So as we know, some people are more risk of catching COVID than others. And what we need to do is to make sure that we understand whether we ourselves fall into that category. Now, I'm pleased to say that I don't. Neither does anybody in my family, and neither does anybody that I come into regular contact with. So from my own point of view, this is a risk that is relatively low. For me. However, I do need to make sure that none of my pupils have people in their family or themselves that would fall into this category, because those are people where we'd have to be careful, and they may decide not to pick up their driving lessons at this time for that very reason. So, you know, certainly people that have been shielding, I would think, be in this category. So that's the first thing that we need to consider. Second thing is we need to look at how we deal with the lessons. Now, I think just looking through this presentation, I'm going to swap actually to the risk assessment itself, because it's slightly better laid out. So I have done the risk assessment for my school. I've published it on my website, so if you wish to view it in detail, you can by simply coming to my website, going to the coronavirus updates page and clicking on the 25th of the 6th or one of the updates for today, or you can go to my COVID lesson precautions page and view it there. And in fact, this is probably a better summary. So we have the 7 control measures. So having established that we're not in a high risk, we then need to make sure that we're talking to our pupils before the lesson begins. So if anybody has any symptoms, if the instructor or the pupil has had any symptoms in the last 7 days or been in contact with somebody within the last 14 days, the lesson must not go ahead, and in terms of the instructor, they must not give any lessons, full stop. So I will be texting instructors, talking to people, certainly talking to them initially, to make sure that's not the case. We need to make sure that prior to the lesson that you are washing your hands as recommended for at least 20 seconds. And that we're all suitably clothed. So currently the recommendation is that we're having our legs and arms fully clothed, which I understand in this weather is not ideal, but we are going to have the windows open in the car to improve ventilation, so that should help. Obviously, as and when Track and Trace gets up and running, we'll also be looking to make sure that's available, and we'll know the date and times of the lesson and who was involved, etc. Preparing the car. Before each lesson and after each lesson, I'm going to be cleaning the car down using anti-bac and antiviral cleaners and disinfectants and wipes. That will include my hands as well as the car itself. Everything is going to be wiped down, and all the touch surfaces, to make sure that things are as clean as possible between pupils. We'll also be spraying the seats with an antibacterial and antivirus spray in between lessons to try and reduce any transfer via the clothing. Those materials will be disposed of in a supply of bin bags, and there will also be a supply of spare gloves and masks to be used if necessary. However, what I will be asking pupils to do is, if possible, to try and secure your own mask and gloves. Obviously these things don't come cheap and they are in short supply, so if pupils can provide their own, that will certainly help. It will help me keep my prices down. My initial approach will not be to increase my prices, but instead to absorb the additional costs that I've got of doing this. But obviously if I am having to constantly give out the PPE, then I may have to revisit that. I will also be using a face visor to improve my own personal protection, and a mask, and as I say, I would be looking for pupils to potentially use masks as well. When we initially meet, we're going to meet outside the car 2 meters apart. There'll be no shaking of hands, and we won't be exchanging any of the materials. We will potentially, this is where I want to make sure you're wearing gloves, and we will be sanitising hands and gloves even if we're wearing them, just to make sure as when we get into the car that they are sanitised. We're going to just at that point just make sure we're both happy with each other's state of health, and I will be performing a non-contact temperature check, and I'll also be looking to perform a sense of smell test, just to do the best we can to try and confirm that there are no symptoms. Within the hour before the lesson, I will also be asking each pupil to send me a text confirming what we said earlier, that you haven't had any symptoms in 7 days or been in contact with anybody for 14 days, and that you accept that any potential liability if you are not really telling the truth in this case. Once we get onto entering the car, we'll basically make sure that the gloves have been put on before we enter the car, and we're taking them off when we leave. If anybody has any latex allergy, then please make yourself aware. The driving lesson itself, hopefully the experience is not going to be too different. We're going to have the windows open. In terms of notes now, a lot of my pupils have got own personal notebooks, which I am going to be collecting in on the first time that I see you. I will still be using those, but I will not be handing them back at the end of the lesson. Instead, if there's any notes that I want you to take away, then I will send you a photo of those so that you've got them in a digital format. I'm afraid that we won't be able to do team lessons where the people in the team are not from the same household, and parents and guardians, etc., cannot come into the lessons. If we have to swap driver's seat at any point for a demonstration, then again we'll be wiping down before or after, as we will do if there's any need for the use of dual controls, or for me to touch anything that the pupil has touched. going to avoid use of cash where possible. If you are paying by cash, then I will accept that, but I won't be giving cash change. We'll either carry it over to the following lesson, or I will send you the change electronically after the lesson. And when we finish a lesson, then please make sure you're washing your hands as soon as you leave it, and get rid of the gloves. After the lessons, again, you want to, well, from my point of view, we'll be washing my clothes at the end of each day. We'll finish for work, potentially taking a shower or bath, and this is to protect people when I get back home. And we'll be reducing the use of the car for family matters in between and after lessons. And then we cycle on again, so whenever the next lesson comes up. Now, as I said earlier, my lessons, I'm planning for them to be longer than they currently are, so I'm looking to do a morning and an afternoon session, preferably of 3 hours, and therefore I would just be meeting 2 customers per day, and that will reduce the number of interactions and reduce the chances of passing on infection between people, because I will be seeing less people on a daily basis. This does mean that lessons will likely be less frequent than weekly, but you will be getting longer lessons, and that will hopefully give the chance for learning to take place in a different way, and possibly sometimes an hour can go so quickly. If that's not going to be suitable for you, then obviously I ask people to let me know as soon as possible. We'll see whether or not we can do anything to address that. So as I said earlier, if you want to see the full risk assessment for my school, which will show, in fact, just before I open that up, we'll just show basically what this shows is all the risks as kind of explained here. And if we did absolutely nothing to try and address those risks, then we would end up with a risk score weighting of 315. The measures that I've discussed here and proposed to take reduce the risk percentage-wise by 54% and give us a score of 145. We're never going to be risk-free. I mean, nothing in life is risk-free, so whilst we're doing our best, it's the same with shops and pubs and all the rest of it. There will still be risks to the community, but we're doing our best to keep them as low as possible. I was looking at the figures for Calderdale today, and Calderdale is currently one of the areas that seems to be less affected than others. The only areas that I could really find that were less affected than Calderdale were down in Cornwall, which is obviously a bit further away from the rest of the country. But we seem to be doing quite well in terms of the number of cases and also the number of excess deaths. We're around about 15% excess deaths, which is considered to be the best measure of just how badly a country has been hit, i.e. how many more people have died during this period than you would normally expect, and the most likely cause of that would be the coronavirus. In Calderdale, it's about 15% excess deaths, which represents 111 people in Calderdale more than they would have expected to die by this time this year, which is obviously tragic, but is a fair bit better than a lot of areas. So that is in our favour, and at the end of the day we'll take these measures. But if I remain COVID-free, and if I only ever sit with clients who have no infection, then the risk is actually zero. What we're doing here is to try and reduce the risk if we're unfortunate enough that we are sitting with somebody who has symptoms. So as I say, the full risk assessment can be seen here. It's a spreadsheet, and it shows how each of the areas is going to be dealt with. Should come up in a second. What we'll do is we'll just pull that up. Here's one I prepared earlier, as they say. So it shows you what the risk is, who's at risk, what the control measures are. So if we did nothing, overall we'd have a score of 315, but taking into account the control measures that I'm putting in place, I see that score is coming down to 145, which is a 54% improvement, and hopefully that will prove to be the case, and my lessons will be COVID-free. So So again, anybody any questions? Because if not, I'm going to move on to the final part of today, which is to show a video that I did recently to help people with spotting signs. Alright, today we're going to have a look at spotting signs and how looking ahead and spotting them early can help make your driving a lot more controlled, a lot more prepared, and help you on your driving test by avoiding fundamental mistakes. So let's start looking for those signs. Darryl from Select Driving School. Today I want to help you look at signs and road markings and how to spot them. Signs and road markings are there to help drivers to navigate the roads and each other safely. Spotting and recognising them early is going to help you be a good driver and help you to plan your journey safely. However, in the early stages of learning, it can feel like they're coming at you at 100 miles an hour, much like we see in the video at the moment. So I'd like to share some tips for where to look, how to interpret and how to react so that your journey can be well planned and impress your examiner. I'm also going to point out some common mistakes to avoid in terms of missing signs, especially on a driving test. I hope you find it useful. If so, please click like or send me a comment or a message on my website or my YouTube channel. Looking out for signs, the first one on the left indicates that it's permit holders only, and then there's another parking sign that we pass there indicating that there are restrictions for parking. There we see that the road on our right is a dead end, and also the other sign that was highlighted the traffic lights are on red, so obviously we've come to a stop, and that's allowed us to take a little time and notice that there's a section of hatched area in the middle that basically separates traffic. So as we set off, we shouldn't go over that hatched area, neither should the van that we just passed on our left hand side. We should both stay away from that area because there's no reason to go into it. As we set off, as we look across the junction, we're going to see a little brown sign that indicates that there's a tourist attraction nearby if we were following directions. And then we see that the speed limit's dropping back down to 20, and there's the 20 mile an hour limit to confirm that. There's a parking restriction on the right hand side, no waiting at all, double yellow lines, but on the left hand side we're limited to parking based on the parking meter. We also just passed a road where we're not allowed to take motor vehicles down, same with the next road coming up on the right, and also there was a repeater sign for the speed limit. Just saw some double yellow lines on the left there. Don't make the mistake on your driving test when you're asked to pull over of picking somewhere where there is yellow paint. Double yellow lines in particular mean that you cannot not wait there. On the right there's a private road that is a dead end, and on the left we saw another direction sign for the tourist attraction, so we should be looking out for the signs that take us in the direction that we need to go.